In 1981, Africa stood on the edge of catastrophe. Cassava, the food keeping 200 million people alive, was being wiped out by a silent plague. Pesticides failed. Famine loomed for 800 million people, with losses topping $2 billion a year. Nothing could stop it. Until researchers turned to a barely visible wasp, a solution so unlikely it almost sounds impossible. How did humanity come to rely on an insect smaller than a grain of rice? And just how close did we come to mass extinction? In 1904, British colonial botanists working in East Africa began to notice something deeply troubling. Cassava, the region's staple crop, was showing signs of a mysterious illness. Leaves faded from green to sickly yellow. Stems softened and rotted from the inside out. Entire fields that once promised life now stood as patches of wilted, dying plants. There was no obvious cause, no new fungus, no drought, no insect anyone could see. Yet the devastation spread from one village to the next, leaving families with little to eat. For millions across the continent, cassava was not just another crop. It provided up to 60% of daily calories, a lifeline in regions where rice and wheat would not grow. By 1906, the die-off had reached a scale that alarmed even distant colonial administrators. Reports described villages where the last stores of cassava were ground into flour, and children waited for relief that never came. Scientists at the time could only record the symptoms, unable to explain why this staple was vanishing so quickly. The crisis exposed a vulnerability that would haunt Africa for decades. When a single crop feeds entire nations, its sudden disappearance threatens not just harvests, but the very survival of millions. In the early 1980s, the scale of the cassava disaster in Africa became impossible to ignore. Cassava, once a symbol of food security, was vanishing from markets and kitchens. Farmers reported entire harvests lost, with once thriving fields reduced to brittle stalks. In the Congo Basin alone, 30 million people faced the threat of starvation. The economic toll was staggering. Annual losses soared to $2 billion, a sum that threatened to bankrupt already struggling communities. For families living on the edge, the price of survival became painfully clear. Chemical pesticides, the only available tool, cost $40 to $60 per hectare, more than many could earn in a month. Spraying was out of reach for most smallholders, and even those who tried found little relief. Traditional methods, rotating crops and burning infested fields, proved useless against an enemy no one could see. By 1981, the situation reached such a critical point that the Food and Agriculture Organization declared a continental emergency. In villages across Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon, farmers gathered in anxious meetings, searching for answers. One farmer, clutching a shriveled cassava root, summed up the desperation. If the cassava dies, we all die. With every failed harvest, the call for a new solution grew louder. Policymakers and scientists began to realize that the old tools had failed, and something entirely different would be needed to save the continent's most vital crop. Inside each cassava field, a silent explosion was underway. The cassava mealybug, barely visible to the naked eye, had a reproductive strategy that defied belief. Unlike most insects, the female mealybug did not need a mate to create offspring. Through parthenogenesis, she could produce up to 600 offspring in a single generation. With warm temperatures and plenty of food, each generation matured in just 3 to 4 weeks. This meant that, in the space of 6 months, a single female could theoretically give rise to 2 billion descendants. The numbers spiraled out of control with terrifying speed. A handful of mealybugs clinging to a cassava stem could become thousands before a farmer even noticed. By the time the first yellowed leaves appeared, the next wave was already spreading, hidden under a waxy shield that made them nearly impossible to wash away or poison. Pesticides failed, rain did nothing, and natural predators in Africa simply ignored them. The mealybugs multiplied relentlessly, each new generation compounding the disaster. Fields that started with a few unnoticed insects soon faced an unstoppable army, overwhelming any hope of manual control. This runaway reproduction was not just a biological curiosity, it was a mathematical certainty, one that threatened to wipe out the continent's most important food source before anyone could find a way to stop it. The cassava mealybug's assault begins at the cellular level. Using a stylet just 0.5 millimeter long, about the width of a human hair, the insect pierces deep into the plant's tissue. This needle-like mouthpart slips past the tough outer layers and taps directly into the phloem, the plant's circulatory system. Once inside, the mealybug does not just draw out sap. It injects a cocktail of specialized enzymes and toxic saliva. These chemicals break down cell walls, disrupt the flow of nutrients, and trigger a chain reaction that the plant cannot stop. Within 2 to 3 weeks, the effects become visible. Leaves yellow and wither. New growth twists and stunts. The plant's energy is drained from the inside out. A single mealybug's feeding might seem insignificant, but in an infested field, thousands act at once. The phloem becomes blocked, and the roots, where cassava stores its calories, shrink and rot. Field studies recorded yield losses as high as 95% in the hardest hit areas. Farmers who once dug up baskets of tubers found only shriveled remnants left behind. The mealybug's waxy coating shields it from rain and most pesticides, making chemical control nearly impossible. Predators native to Africa, from ants to beetles, ignore this invader. Without a natural enemy, the mealybug's damage continues unchecked, turning once productive fields into barren ground. The devastation is not just visible above the soil. At the microscopic level, the plant's lifelines are being severed, one stem at a time. Hans Herren arrived in South America with little more than a field notebook and a sense of urgency. He and his team moved from one remote cassava patch to the next, searching for any sign of the pest's natural enemies. The work was painstaking. Over 400 sites were surveyed, each one a possible dead end. In wild Paraguayan cassava, Herren finally spotted what he had been hoping for: a wasp barely 1 millimeter long, almost invisible against the pale stems. This was Anagyrus lopezi. Under a hand lens, the wasp's mission became clear. Females would lay up to 80 eggs, each inside a living mealybug. The larvae consumed their host from within, killing it in just 10 to 14 days. In controlled tests, the wasp ignored all other insects, attacking only the cassava mealybug. This precision meant it could be released safely, without risking other species. For Herren, the discovery was more than scientific success. It was a race won against time and hunger, and a breakthrough that would soon be tested on a scale never attempted before. In 1982, the first wasps were released into Nigerian cassava fields. Technicians and farmers carried small vials, opening them at over 100 test sites scattered across the countryside. Within months, the wasps multiplied at astonishing rates, moving from one plant to the next, their numbers growing exponentially. By 1984, surveys measured parasitism so dense that in some areas, up to 1 million wasps could be found in a single square kilometer. The cassava mealybug population collapsed, 95% gone in less than 3 years. The campaign, coordinated by the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, cost just $27 million. For every dollar invested, African farmers gained $200 in restored harvests. No chemicals, no repeat treatments, and most importantly, no harm to other insects or plants. The wasps ignored every species except the cassava mealybug, a result confirmed by years of independent monitoring. By 1986, these tiny wasps had spread naturally across 2.7 million square kilometers, an area larger than Western Europe. Cassava fields, once written off as lost, pulsed with green again. The success was not just immediate, it was permanent, self-sustaining, and safe, setting a new standard for biological control worldwide. Today, one tiny wasp still keeps Africa's cassava fields alive, proof that nature's solutions can outlast any chemical fix. With 99.9% of beneficial insects undiscovered, the next lifesaver may vanish before we ever find it. Biodiversity isn't a luxury, it's our survival. Thanks for watching.